Ash Ridge, New Mexico Territory, spring 1884. When 22-year-old Sarah Mitchell's parents sold her in the town square for being barren, calling her worthless, she never expected salvation to come for a weathered stranger. Bo Harrison, a widowed rancher with 8 children, paid without question and simply said, "She won't be judged anymore." What began as a transaction would become a testament to how love grows not from perfection, but from the courage to choose each other when the world gives up on you. Chapter 1. The Transaction. The spring wind carried dust through the streets of Ash Ridge, New Mexico Territory, mixing with the smell of manure and charred March 15th, 1884, brought the kind of dry day where nothing moved unless it had to. Folks gathered in the market square, drawn by the promise of livestock, tools, and something far stranger. Sarah Mitchell stood at 22 in a faded blue dress, hands clenched at her sides. Her father shoved her into the center of the square like livestock on display. She could cook and sew, he announced to anyone with coin enough to take her home that night. The crowd maintained uncomfortable silence. Women looked away. Children peered from behind skirts. The sun burned her skin, while shame burned worse beneath it. Her father spoke of her barrenness with clinical detachment, explaining her failed marriage and empty womb as mere inconveniences. 2 years of desperate trying had ended with her husband casting her out. Her steady hands and sound teeth became selling points, as if she were a horse being evaluated. Sarah had learned the futility of begging. Near the crowd's edge, her mother stood wrapped in a threadbare shawl, gaze fixed on the ground. When people began drifting away, her mother simply disappeared with them, as if she'd never come to witness this final abandonment. The bidding commenced with casual cruelty. Ranchers called out numbers like they were pricing cattle. Sarah closed her eyes, trying to summon her grandmother's lullabies, but heard only her father's voice growing more desperate. Then a man stepped forward, broad-shouldered, shirt stiff with dust and trail wear, his wide-brimmed hat cast shadows over weathered features. He smelled of horse and pine. This stranger didn't examine her like the others had. He simply reached into his coat, pulled out a leather pouch, and placed more coins on the table than anyone else offered. No negotiation, no questions. Her father, surprised, asked if he understood the terms. The man's response came quietly but firmly. She wouldn't be judged anymore. Then he walked away. The crowd dispersed with indifference. Her father gave one final shove, declaring her the stranger's responsibility. Sarah gathered her meager possessions and followed this unknown man toward uncertainty. The wagon near the blacksmith shop sat hitched to 2 patient mules. Sarah climbed beside her silent benefactor, still ignorant of his name. Bo Harrison offered her a dented canteen. The water tasted of metal and prairie wind, but was mercifully cool. They rolled past Ash Ridge into endless grassland beneath an infinite sky. The journey proceeded in contemplative silence. His weathered face suggested 35 years under the western sun. Scarred hands rested easily on the reins. No wedding ring. When she asked why he'd chosen her, his answer revealed both practicality and compassion. 8 children waited at home, motherless and needing care. But when she assumed she'd be a governess, he corrected her. He sought simply someone who wasn't cruel. That alone was sufficient. Evening brought them to a ranch nestled against the land's natural contours. The house leaned slightly westward, weathered by countless storms. A gray barn stood behind it, while chickens scattered at their approach. Bo secured the wagon and led her to the house. A heavy quilt nailed across the doorframe served as the front door, protection against relentless prairie winds. Inside, 8 pairs of eyes looked up from the dim interior. 6 boys and 2 girls, ranging from perhaps 6 to 16 years old. Their faces reflected the particular wariness that comes from loss too early experienced. Fever had claimed their mother 2 winters previous, leaving silence heavier than sound. Bo's introduction carried no ceremony. Sarah would be staying. The youngest, a boy with sandy hair and oversized eyes, immediately wrapped his arms around Bo's leg. The man scooped him up with practiced ease, speaking of countless moments of needed reassurance. Sarah's quarters waited upstairs, small, sparse but clean. A wash basin, narrow bed, and window overlooking fields comprised her new world. She set down her satchel and sat on the bed's edge, hands trembling not from cold but from overwhelming realization. Her life had changed completely in a single afternoon. Below, 8 children were learning to accept her presence, while somewhere in this weathered house lived a man who had purchased her freedom without asking anything except that she not be cruel. As darkness settled over the prairie, Sarah remained on that narrow bed, listening to wind test the house's boards and wondering if salvation could arrive so quietly, purchased with simple coins and the promise that judgment had finally ended. Chapter 2. 8 Hearts to Win. Morning brought chaos. The cabin stirred early with footsteps on creaking boards and soft chatter broken by coughs. Sarah moved carefully, uncertain of every step. She didn't know who slept lightly or who preferred their eggs scrambled, if there were eggs at all. 8 children maintained careful distance, studying her like a complex puzzle. Judah, 16 and the eldest, watched with arms folded and eyes too old for his age. 12-year-old Marcus whispered to 10-year-old Levi, both stealing glances at Sarah. 8-year-old Timothy observed everything while 6-year-old Samuel, the youngest boy, hovered nearby, copying her movements in silence. The girls presented unique challenges. 14-year-old Rebecca clutched a fabric scrap near the fire, refusing to release what was likely her mother's handkerchief. 10-year-old Mary clung to Rebecca's side, whispering unanswered questions. Sarah's first attempts bordered on catastrophic. Beans turned to paste despite careful attention. Bread dough remained stubbornly flat. She spilled precious coffee, scalding her hand when the tin pot slipped. Later, mending Timothy's shirt, she jabbed her finger twice before the needle rolled beneath the stove. Each failure felt magnified under watchful eyes. Sarah pressed her lips together and swept until her shoulders ached. The children's silence felt heavier than criticism. That afternoon brought her greatest disaster. While lifting a heavy stew pot, her grip failed completely. Cast iron crashed to the floor with thunderous impact, sending stew splattering everywhere. The sound startled hens outside, while all 8 children froze. Sarah stood motionless, heart pounding, waiting for the explosion of anger she'd learned to expect. Her former husband's sharp words about worthless women echoed in her memory. But the expected storm never came. Instead, the door opened quietly. Bo stepped inside, surveyed the mess without comment, then looked at Sarah's stricken face. Without a word, he crouched down, retrieved the pot, and began wiping stew from the floor with methodical efficiency. When finished, he delivered judgment in 4 simple words. It was just stew. Then he walked back outside, leaving Sarah frozen with a cleaning rag clutched in her hand. The heat in her throat wasn't shame this time, but something quieter, something she couldn't yet name. That evening, after the children had disappeared into their rooms, Sarah sat alone on the porch. Cool air carried sage scent while stars burned overhead. She tried not to cry, but failed. Later, she checked on sleeping children. Rebecca had kicked off her blanket, still clutching that precious scrap. Marcus mumbled in his sleep, while Samuel lay curled with his thumb in his mouth. When Mary stirred and whimpered, Sarah noticed her forehead felt alarmingly warm. She stepped into the hallway, where Bo already waited, possessing some parental instinct for detecting trouble. Sarah's medical knowledge, learned from her grandmother's healing practices, finally proved useful. She needed willow bark and mint. Bo produced everything without question, trusting her expertise completely. Sarah boiled water, crushed herbs, and prepared damp cloths while Mary's fever raged. She pressed cool linen to the girl's face, cradled her trembling frame, and hummed gentle melodies throughout the entire night, never stopping despite exhaustion. When the fever finally broke at dawn and Mary whispered about wanting pancakes, Sarah nearly wept with relief. Bo had remained in the doorway, watching silently. The tension in his shoulders eased as he witnessed genuine devotion. His eyes studied Sarah as if seeing her clearly for the first time. The next morning, steam curled from a kettle already warming when Sarah descended. Beside it sat a tin mug and folded paper containing 2 words in stiff handwriting. "Thank you." Sarah held the note longer than intended, then wrapped her hands around the warm mug. The tea tasted sharp and bitter with pine, but warmed her chest like something solid. Through the window, prairie grass swayed while something inside her, something tight and long kept shut, began cautiously opening. Chapter 3. Earning the Name. Spring settled into the bones of the land, and the cabin's rhythm began changing. Sarah's hands found their steadiness again. Bread finally rose, beans stayed whole, and she stitched feed sacks into warm scarves for each child. They wore them without asking why. She taught letters by candlelight, helping Timothy trace his name on pieces of kindling. Soft songs drifted over cracked soup bowls while she braided Rebecca's hair into neat ropes, tying them with blue ribbon salvage from an old trunk. Sarah learned what each child feared. Judah hated thunder, Marcus lied when embarrassed, and Mary grew quiet when missing her mother. The children watched what she did rather than listening to what she said. They observed how she stayed, how she mended their clothes with patient hands, how she never raised her voice even when Samuel spilled milk repeatedly during breakfast. The transformation happened gradually, then suddenly. First, Levi passed her a wooden spoon with a casual word that made the room go still. Then Timothy said it the next day, followed by Rebecca, then Samuel, who had already decided she belonged to him completely. She became Mama through the slow naming of what already existed. No ceremony or announcement required. That same week brought an unwelcome trip to Dustbin for supplies. Bo hitched the wagon and invited her along. Sarah climbed up without hesitation, though her stomach tightened as familiar buildings appeared on the horizon. In town, while Bo shopped for salt and nails, Sarah waited on the general store porch. Her former mother-in-law's voice cracked sharply across the square, loud enough to draw stares. The woman stood near the dry goods stall with her son's new wife, a young thing with lace gloves and obvious pride in her condition. Their words carried deliberately across the market. Comments about barren ghosts and cursed women, about useful purposes and family names. Sarah's hands curled into fists, but she remained silent, jaw set against the familiar cruelty. Bo emerged from the store at that moment, salt sack in his arms. He surveyed the scene with quiet assessment, then spoke words that would echo in Sarah's memory for years. She was the one who got Mary to sleep when nightmares came. He said calmly. The one who taught Samuel not to throw rocks at chickens. The one who made their house feel like home again. The women fell silent, their ammunition spent against his simple truth. Bo nodded toward the wagon, asking if she was ready. Sarah nodded back, and they walked away together, leaving the poisonous words behind them like dust. That night, Sarah didn't speak of what happened. Instead, she tucked 8 children into their beds, running gentle hands over sleepy heads while something warm and permanent settled in her chest like a foundation finally lays on solid ground. Chapter 4. Blood and Belonging. The morning was cold enough to turn breath visible when a scream shattered the quiet. High and sharp, unmistakably one of the children. Sarah dropped her bowl of biscuit dough, flour flying like snow, and ran barefoot across the yard. Timothy lay crumpled near the woodpile, his face contorted in pain. His leg was twisted beneath him while the old axe sat inches away, its blades streaked red. Sarah knelt beside him, already pressing her hands to his thigh where blood oozed from a jagged gash. Bo came running, his face pale but hands steady. He scooped the boy up without hesitation and cleared the kitchen table in one swift motion. Sarah's heart pounded so hard she couldn't hear her own footsteps as she fetched boiling water and clean muslin from the cupboard. Working with trembling hands, her tears dropping onto the cloth, Sarah pressed bandages against the wound. Timothy cried out through gritted teeth, his small fist clenched tight. She wrapped the gash with knot after knot, press after press, watching red soak through the fabric until finally the bleeding slowed. The boy blinked up at her, pale but awake, and whispered something that made her heart stop. Despite his pain, he was worried about making her cry. Sarah pressed her lips together, breathing in his trust like a prayer, and told him he made the best wooden horses in the whole territory. Later, when Timothy was resting with his leg propped up and the others had gathered close around the hearth, the children moved differently around her. Mary brought her a blanket without being asked. Samuel curled up against her side like a cat seeking warmth. Marcus handed her a carved wooden bird with a broken wing, explaining quietly that she could fix things that were broken, which meant she was staying for good. Then Judah, the quietest and most guarded of them all, looked up from his whittling and asked the question that hung in the air like smoke. Was she planning to stay? Sarah didn't answer with words. She simply nodded, and that was enough. They had already called her Mama, but now, for the first time, she accepted the title completely. Bo watched it all unfold from across the room, his hands resting on his knees, his eyes fixed not on the fire but on her. Something had shifted during those desperate moments when Timothy's life hung in the balance. Sarah had proven herself not just capable, but irreplaceable. That night, after the house had gone still, Bo stepped onto the porch where Sarah sat wrapped in her shawl. The sky stretched full of stars that didn't blink. For a long time, they stood in comfortable silence, both understanding that today had changed everything. She belonged here now, not because she'd been purchased, but because she'd chosen to stay when staying mattered most. Chapter 5. Drought and Devotion. Summer came down like judgment. 7 weeks without rain. The sky stayed pale and cruel, the color of bleached bone. The creek shrank to mud while the land cracked like broken pottery. Corn curled brown, beans withered, and chickens stopped laying entirely. Bo spoke less each day, working longer and returning with dirt in his eyes and nothing in his hands. 8 stomachs growled through thin walls at night, yet Sarah rose before dawn anyway. She filled every basin with precious water and waged war against the dying garden. The earth fought her, dry as ash, hard as stone, but she broke it anyway, turned it over, and made space where none existed. Each morning she watered. Each evening she sang old lullabies to drooping plants, as if melody could summon moisture from cloudless skies. Then Bo collapsed near the fence line, fever burning through his weathered frame. Sarah wiped his brow with cool cloths and spooned water between his lips while he muttered in fevered dreams. Near midnight, he whispered desperately about not being left alone. By morning, the fever broke. When Bo opened his eyes, Sarah was still there, hair loose, face pale, hands cracked from fighting drought. Later, checking the garden, they found it. One perfect red tomato clinging to a vine, split but alive. Bo kissed her hands then, slow and deliberate, like she was something sacred. When he raised his eyes to hers, she kissed him back, not as rescue or claim, but as two people who had waited too long to acknowledge what they felt. Chapter 6. Legacy of the Chosen. They came in spring with polished wagons and clean hats, government contractors bearing maps and promises of prosperity. The railroad would cut directly through their ridge, they announced while spreading official papers across the kitchen table. The company offered substantial payment for the land, enough to build proper houses in town and send all 8 children to established schools with real teachers. Sarah stood near the stove with arms crossed, while Bo remained motionless by the doorway. Outside, the swing hung crooked from the oak tree, where little hands had worn smooth grooves in the rope. Beyond that, her garden rustled in the soft wind, its soil still bearing the marks of her determined hands. The carved bench sat beneath the pine, where they had shared countless cups of coffee through difficult seasons. Bo absorbed every detail of his surroundings without looking directly at anything. His response came simple and final. The land wasn't for sale. The railroad could adjust its route or find another hill to cross. The contractors packed their maps and departed without further discussion. That evening, as the sun dropped behind the ridge, Sarah and Bo stood at the road's edge with a plank of wood and a hammer. The children watched from the porch while Sarah drove nails into a sign that would stand for generations. Burned into the grain were words that spoke their truth, not for sale. Someone was once allowed to stay here. That's enough. Time moved like weather, slow and certain. 8 children grew tall, their voices deepened, and their hands grew calloused from honest work. One by one, they left to chase lives of their own. Some returned with babies, others sent letters smelling of train soot and distant towns. But the house never emptied. It filled in new ways with laughter and footsteps too small for boots. Sarah's garden stretched wider each year, bending with the wind and spilling over planned boundaries. Corn grew beside sunflowers, mint tangled with onions, everything flourishing in places it wasn't supposed to grow. Every morning, Bo stood on the porch watching her move between rows like she belonged there, witnessing miracles that needed no words. When their time came, they were buried beneath the old oak tree at the garden's edge. Bo carved Sarah's headstone himself, bearing one simple line. Here grew everything she was never given, and all that she gave anyway. Long after the railroad curve around their hill, travelers still slowed their wagons to read the weathered sign, remembering that some places hold those who refuse to leave, and sometimes dry hills bloom for ones who chose love when no one else did. What started as the worst day of Sarah's life became the beginning of everything beautiful. If this story of finding family in unexpected places touched your heart, hit that subscribe button and let me know in the comments which moment moved you most. Thanks for listening, and I'll see you in the next story.